Okay, so that's doing it now. I'm going to share the screen. There we are. Good. So far, so good. Right. Okay, so I've, this topic is something to actually stretch the old imagination and the brains and everything else because it's quite complicated. I uh, I had to leave bits out because I thought it might be a little bit over the top, but I can always, if there's more that you want to know, I can always come back to it another time and modify it and extend it or chop bits out or whatever. So I thought about the nervous system. How am I going to break it down? And so what I did, I went into what it does, and from there it sort of worked out quite nicely. So I asked you, what's the function of the nervous system? So what is it made up of? So we've got the brain, of course, up the top, the spinal cord, the various sensory organs, and the nerves, which really are the cables that put everything together. So everything in the body is reliant on it. It's a controlling mechanism. It's regulatory, and the communication systems that without it, without a fully functional nervous system, we just wouldn't exist to the best of our abilities. So we have um, a lot of voluntary controls. So we can control our movement, we can talking and speaking and swallowing, and lots of involuntary, the things that we have no control over, or sometimes a little bit, like you can hold your breath for a short time, but the breathing, you don't even have to worry about it because the brain controls it for you and it changes the rate of breathing as required. Digestion, you have no idea what's going on, and it actually it's done for you. Our blood pressure, waste removal systems we have, and what happens in an emergency. Um, the hormones that are released and everything else that's under control. And of course, the brain is also about the higher levels, the mental activities like the learning, the speaking, the memory, and actually thinking. So if we join all that together with the endocrine system, which we've spoken about before, we have the mechanisms for regulating our homeostasis, our level control, how our temperature, our sugar levels, for example, anything that has to be controlled within our bodies is done between the endocrine or the hormones and the brain, the nervous system. So here is a diagram showing the systems. So we have the whole system, the nervous system, is broken up into two parts, really. The central nervous system, which is mainly from the brain, and the peripheral is what it says. It's sort of away from the brain, in the body itself. Now, I need to point. So can you see the pointer moving? Someone nod. No? See the pointer moving? Great. So the central nervous system is the spinal cord, which is attached to the brain stem, which is attached to, or part of the brain itself. It's got the major parts, the hindbrain, midbrain, forebrain. There's a lot more detail later, but So it connects to this, and then the spinal cord delivers different parts of the body. On the other hand, the peripheral nervous system is what links us to the outside world. We have the inside world, which is the brain and what's in the spinal cord, and then the rest of it. Now that's broken up into two parts. The autonomic nervous system, which is broken up into two parts, what's called sympathetic and parasympathetic. So the sympathetic is really the protective one, the fight or flight, and the parasympathetic is the homeostatic one, which is, I'll get to later. The other part, the somatic, soma means the body, the cells. So it controls voluntary movements. So the somatic nervous system links to the muscles, which of course move our bones, which moves us. So let's start with the basics. The nerves, the neurons. Same thing, two different words. So there's a cell body. So that's where the nucleus, all living cells have a nucleus, and they've got the basic cell, but most cells are either round or a little bit longish. But this one is so long, the nerve cell, it could run from the lower back to your toes. So it could be quite a long thing. So we have a cell body. It's got a nucleus, which means it's got the DNA, and through that it produces what are called neurotransmitters. Now that word is going to come up a lot. Now neuro means nerve, transmitters information, it transmits information. At this stage, I'll leave it there and I'll come back later. Often. It's got the dendrites. So dendrites are the bits that receive information from other areas, from other nerves, or from sensory organs about touch, temperature. Then you've got the axon, which is the long bit usually, and that it's sends the messages from the nucleus of the cell body go to the synapses, and the synapses meet up with wherever it's going. There's also, again, this is only the intro. The myelin sheath, it protects it, and more information on that. So here's a diagram. Lots of similar diagrams, but they're all a little bit different, just to ram home the information. So here's the cell body, which looks, if you get rid of the staghorns, if you like, the dendrites, it looks like any other cell initially. So attached to that, you've got these dendrites, and information from other nerve cells come into this area. So this is the other end of it. So that could look like this, where they're called the terminal branches, but they could be in this from somewhere else. So we have this long bit here, longish. It could be quite long, it could be quite short. It depends on what part of the body and what it does. It's called the axon, and the signal moves down there. And the signal is an electric signal. And so they call it a neural impulse. Now, at the other end, we have these synapses, and the synapse is, the word's not actually there, but it's how the signal from this nerve goes to wherever it's going. It could be another nerve, as I mentioned, but it could be a muscle, it could be an organ, it could be anything, it could be the, I don't know, let's say the adrenal gland, it needs something done, it could be the kidney, it could be anything. So the cell body itself is like any other cell. So it's got mitochondria, it's got the nucleus I mentioned, and all the other organelles, are all there. So it's a living, very fast acting cell. And it's got mitochondria along the way. Now, mitochondria, if you remember from past times, is the organ that produces ATP. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is the high energy molecule that we get our energy. So I'm talking, I'm thinking, I'm moving my hands and arms. I could not do any of that if my mitochondria around the body were working. We're not working. So all the energy that we use, virtually all the energy that we use, comes from that. There is another little source that I won't worry about that now. So now the dendrites. So this one was the cell body. So this part is the cell body. Okay, the actual section where the nucleus is. The dendrites, it comes from the Greek dendron, tree. I didn't know. I've forgotten about that. But it was nice seeing that word again. So they're very short usually, very much branched like here. And as I said, they get information from other cells, other nerves, or within our skin, we've got pain receptors, touch receptors, temperature receptors. And each of those would have their own links to the dendrites, which go somewhere else. The other end, you've got the axon and so on. Here, the synapses meeting something else. It doesn't matter. The point is that these dendrites bring information in. Now, the actual cell of the cell body doesn't process it. It just passes the information on. And well, that's the essential part. So they receive incoming information, and then they carry it into here, and then it passes it on. So the axon itself carries the signal from the nuclear area to the end plate. Now, the end plate is very important. Okay, but I'll get to that in a second. Now, there are two types of signals: the chemical signal, and an electrical signal. And the chemical signals are the neurotransmitters. And you get there in a second. So the cell body, due to the nucleus, produce the neurotransmitters as required, and they move through the axon to the end plate. The electrical, so they actually move through, the axon is an extension of the cell. It's hollow, and it's got liquid in it, of course, and so on. And it's got a mechanism, I didn't go into it, but it's got a mechanism of moving things down, and then when they're finished with them, it brings it up again. So it's a two-way movement through this very fine axon. The electrical signals are brought to the dendrites from somewhere else, and then they're carried along the axon membrane, but it's along the membrane, not inside. Okay, the neurotransmitters are inside the axon. The electrical signal, which causes the release of the chemicals, the neurotransmitters, they move along the actual membrane. So when the electrical signal reaches the end plate, some of these are released into the synapse, which is a gap. I'm slowly adding words. So now the neurotransmitters, when they're released here, they move across the gap of the synapse to the effector organ. Now, the effector organ is a general name for whatever is going to be stimulated. So it could be an organ somewhere in the body. It could be a muscle, so you can move things. And so they stimulate action. Something has to happen. That's why the signal goes down. And the stronger and longer the electrical signal is, the more neurotransmitter is released. So for example, if you want to lift something like a pen, not much neurotransmitter is required for me to actually hold the pen between my fingers and hold my arm up. If I go to the other room and pick up a 10-kilo dumbbell, I would need much greater action by my muscles, which means a lot more neurotransmitter has to be released, so the signals are much greater. So if I'm going to do some movement with my little dumbbell, it requires a lot of energy, but it requires a lot of material, signal in the form of neurotransmitters to constantly go and stimulate the muscle. It's not a one-site over and over and over and over again until you put it down and change it, or pick up more weight, and then the amount of neurotransmitter released is even more. So here is a synapse, a diagram, of course. So here's the end of the axon, and the cell body is high up. The neural message comes along the membrane there. Before we go in, these things represent mitochondria, which require energy, which is being used all along the way. These vesicles are what holds the neurotransmitter, and they're pretty much the same number of molecules in each of these vesicles. When the signal comes here down, you get what's exocytosis. It means that, say, this vesicle here will be moved down here, and the material that the cell membrane is made of is exactly the same as what the vesicle's membrane is made of, the packaging. So as you see here, it joins the membrane, it opens up, and it releases it. So now there are two ways of doing it. You can do it this way if you really need it very quickly, but in a more controlled way, they have these transporters, and these come along here, and the neurotransmitter moves along. Now there's a gap here. It's called a synaptic gap. And we're talking very, very small, because it takes almost no time. I mean, for you to think about doing something and doing it doesn't take much time. So the message has to get down the axon very quickly and across this gap for these chemicals and neurotransmitters. Wherever it's going, like a muscle, there are these receptors. And then every time one of these neurotransmitters gets into a receptor, it sends a signal down to wherever it's going, say the muscle. But as soon as this happens, the receptor releases the neurotransmitter and then waits for a new one to come. The used neurotransmitters are then taken up by the end plate, this thing here, and there's a mechanism within the axon of collecting these and moving them back up to the cell body where they're reprocessed. Now, if that doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what will. And this is happening in your body constantly. Okay, now there are two different types of neurotransmitters. So if some are excited, excitatory, then something happens, causes firing commands, and others are inhibitory. So they stop. I'm using the word action potential. I'll come back in a second. They stop signals from the brain from moving on, and so we need. It's like an accelerator and a brake, okay? And they're different ones, and different parts of the body have different neurotransmitters for different functions. So there are 7 major ones. I'll go through the 7. You've heard of some of them. Now, acetylcholine, it was the very, very first one that was discovered. And this is the one that works on muscles, mostly. 99.9% is muscles that it works. It's only a small molecule, and that's the one, that's a neurotransmitter that comes down the axon and stimulates muscles to contract. In the brain, it also helps direct attention. So hopefully you're all paying attention, and it's due to the acetylcholine in your brain that's keeping your attention there. It also very important to neuroplasticity, which is, I'll get to it at the end. But it's how the brain really fixes itself up when things go wrong, when it can. Now, there's a second one called dopamine. And this is what they call the pleasure chemicals. So now this is in mammals, and they receive a reward for their behavior. The reward could be food or drugs or sex or whatever it might be. If you've had a hard day and you want to have a tiny bit of a whiskey or a brandy, you drink and you feel good, you feel great. That is a dopamine effect. Have a strong cup of coffee. Have, I don't know, your favorite piece of cake, anything like that. It would send the pleasure in the brain is due to this neurotransmitter. And it affects our behavior. We are after the dopamine release. By the way, this word cognition is about learning. It's also involved in that. So, so dopamine. Look at the list that's involved. Motivation to do things, and you feel good about having done it. When I'm doing this lesson, I get a buzz out of doing the lesson. So my dopamine is being released. Decision making. You make a decision. Do I go left? Do I go right? Whatever it might be. Am I going to spend $10,000 on something? That's a decision. Movement. So dopamine is involved in movement. So, and you feel good about the movement, dancing or whatever it might be, running, I don't know, whatever. Now, the reward processing is what I was mentioning before. It's very involved. Attention. So how well you listen, you attend to something. If you're you can have 2 people going to a concert or a play, and one person is really amazed, and they're 100% attending, watching and taking it in, and somebody else next to them isn't interested at all, their dopamine levels are very different. Memory, working memory. You know, I'm going to get up and go to the toilet, but if I'm halfway to the toilet, by the time I get there, I get distracted. I can't remember why I got up. That sort of the working memory, if it's functioning well, it's all due to the dopamine, and of course the process of learning. Now this is new word, guys. When I do this sort of talk, I go to the latest papers as well, but it takes a long time, and I look for something new. So they found that in Parkinson's, it's also dopamine, also in that addiction, schizophrenia, and neuropsychiatric disorders. So when there's a lack of it, you've got it. The addiction part is when there's a huge amount of it. Yeah, usually I get lists, not why or how. Okay, glutamate is another one. It's excitatory. It's in the cortex, that means the outside of the brain. And what it does, it's very important for learning and memory. So this is called long-term potentiation. So this is where the molecules help process and produce the memory, because it's all molecular, and it's laid down. And so this is the glutamate has its own type of neurons in the hippocampus, which is in the middle of the brain, and the cortex, which is the outside, and they talk to each other all the time. And the hippocampus is where a lot of the memory is stored. Okay. Now serotonin is very different. It's a calming chemical. By the way, if any of you have a chemistry background, it's also called 5-HT, which is hydroxytryptamine. Now, tryptamine is one of the amino acids, one of the 20 amino acids we use, and in carbon 5 there's a hydroxy molecule. It's OH. That doesn't matter. But it's a chemical, and it modulates our moods. It affects our moods, and and now it's linked to depression and neuropsychiatric disorders. And this is when it's lacking. So the mood is not being controlled, is not being modulated, and and also it seems to have an effect on appetite, on sleep, and memory. And the latest one I found was decision-making behaviors, and we saw that with back here with dopamine. Okay, so our brains, our system is amazing, full of these chemicals, which affect so many parts of our everyday life, and we have no idea about it. So long as everything's okay, everything's good. But as soon as something is depleted or there's too much of it, we have problems. Norepinephrine is also called noradrenaline, and it's a hormone, and it's also a neurotransmitter. So it's also been linked to mood, arousal, how wide awake you are. Now, vigilance is very, very important, not so much in humans, but in animals. They're very vigilant, especially if they are tasty and they have predators who like to eat them. So they're keeping vigilance. Memory, of course, stress, norepinephrine, and put this in. So it's also involved in post-traumatic stress disorder, and also they found Parkinson's. Again, I don't know how, but it seems to be affected. Then we get oxytocin and vasopressin, and these two are made in the hypothalamus. Now that's in, well, how can I explain it? There's more about the hypothalamus later, but just to give you an idea of positioning, we have a little organ, a tiny organ about the size of a pea called the pituitary, and that's called the master gland. And if you take two knitting needles or chopsticks, and one between the eyes and one in the side of the head, and where the two meet in the middle is exactly where the pituitary is in the middle. And just above that is the hypothalamus. And just above that is the thalamus. Now, that's why the hypothalamus is called the hypothalamus, is because hypo means under the thalamus. And then we have, oh, hang on, I didn't finish this. So we've got this, so these two act in and involved in pair bonding formation. So animals pairing up for mating, monogamous behaviors, sticking together, drug addiction. Yeah. So hormones like estrogen and testosterone, they also work as neurotransmitters, and they influence synaptic activity. So they are very, very much involved in a lot of us. We all have some testosterone, we all have some estrogen, and some are more, some are less. So, but they're very important to who we are. Now, so we've got the axon. We talked about the neurotransmitters that are moved down to the synapse, and where they go through the synaptic gap to the effector organ. But to get the release of these neurotransmitters, which eventually get to the synapse, to the synaptic plate, we need to get the signal there quickly. So it's an electrical signal, and imagine the brain, or right through the whole body, we have a lot of water. Now, if you throw something into a bath full of water and it's connected to electricity, the house will short. Okay, water will carry the charge away very quickly. So there's this myelin sheath which protects from the electric charge, which moves down the axon, from dissipating. So you can get all the way down to the synapse. Now, the myelin sheath itself is made of many, many cells, and they're fatty cells, because fat does not transmit electricity, and they're called Schwann cells, after some guy called Schwann, I guess. And they actually wrap themselves around the axon as the axon is formed. And this, but it's not continuous, because they are, there are little gaps. So whereas they wrap themselves around the axon, they don't touch each other. So these little gaps between the Schwann cells are called the nodes of Ranvier. And when the signal gets to them, it doesn't stop, it jumps like a spark. It just jumps across and continues. Now, this is an amazing number I found. Our signals, electric signals, travel at about 400 kilometers an hour along a healthy nerve system. Pretty fast. Now, if the myelin sheath is disrupted, like in multiple sclerosis, the signal drops to about 1%. So the signals take so long to get there, the person has virtually no control. So the muscles just can't contract. So here's a diagram showing you this. So here's the axon, the yellow one, and this is a Schwann cell. But what it does, once it's wrapped itself around like this, grew around so it meets, where the nucleus is, it starts growing around and around and around, so you get this sort of effect. So when you you take a nerve and you do a transverse section, and it's cut across that way, or that way if you like. And this is what you see. And you can see it in a light microscope and much more clearly in an electron microscope, which is what my background is, the electron microscopy. And so it's amazing. So here you have a piece of nerve, the axon, and the membrane around it, and here's the myelin sheath, and that's full Schwann cell. Now here, the diagram, we have a number of these. Okay, a different diagram. Here's again this wrapping of the Schwann cells, but there's a gap, and that gap is the node of Ranvier, which I mentioned. So signals moving from here will come along here, along the membrane. This is the electric signal along the membrane. Then when they get to here, they just jump across. Down here, by the way, if you remember, last time we talked about muscles, and the muscles are like this, where the actin and the myosin move together, and the signal by what's called a neuromuscular junction that's at the end plate here, the synaptic plate, and when the neurotransmitter moves through, this is acetylcholine for muscles, it causes these to come together, and the muscle shortens, and we do something. We do some movement. Okay. I found this little diagram, normal type, about 400 kilometers an hour, really fast. If the myelin is disrupted, then it's a very, very slow movement. And this is what it looks like. In multiple sclerosis, it's called demyelination. Now, myelin, the Schwann cells that produce the myelin, are living cells, and the body's immune system, for some reason, starts to attack it and break it down. So this is the breakdown, so the signal just can't get through properly. Okay, so we have these things called reflexes, and there are different sorts of reflexes. And this is I thought I'd spend a bit of time on the simple reflex. Now, this is very, very important for our survival, animal survival, and it's an automatic response. The reflex is automatic, and it goes through what's called the reflex arc. The information comes in to the spinal cord and out again immediately. So if you're touching, you're cooking and you touch a pot or something that's really hot, you're able to move your hand away very, very quickly, but it moves before you even know you've touched it. If you're sewing or you're gardening and something prickles you, um, your hand will move away, your finger will move away. And this withdrawal, oh, spelling mistake. I must go back and fix the F. And so anything that is there, these simple references are there to protect us. People who do not have this, or their sensory, there's a condition, I can't think of what it's called, where the touch and temperature receptors don't work anymore. So they could be holding a burning stick or so, a fire, and they will not feel it. There are people, they can't go to the beach, for example, on a very hot day, because they'll walk on very hot sand, or maybe they'll say, let's get an ice cream, so they cross the road to the milk bar, and they'll burn their feet on the very hot bitumen rather than wearing shoes because they can't feel it. It's not common, but it happens. So there are only two nerves involved for this, the simple reflex arc. There's a sensory neuron, so it picks up the information, and then there's a motor neuron, which actually does the movement. All right, so that it could be light, or pressure, or sound, or temperature. Now, the motor neuron then passes this signal to the effector cell. I used this word before. An effector is something at the end of the signal which does something. So if by moving my fingers, the muscles in my forearm are the effector glands, if you like, or organs. There are no finger muscles in the hand. They're all in the forearm. The thumb has a couple of muscles, but not the fingers. The effector could be a muscle cell or a gland cell, which carries out the response. So, for example, if I ask you to think of the smell of a lemon, think that you're smelling a lemon. And if you can actually almost smell the lemon, you'll find that there's saliva pouring into your mouth. Now, so the salivary gland is the effector gland. So here's a reflex arc. You're touching something sharp. The signal goes through to the spinal cord. It goes through what's called an interneuron, and then flies out again to the muscle, which pulls the finger away. Now, if it's traveling at 400 kilometers an hour and the length of your arm isn't that great, you can imagine how quickly that works. But as well as doing this arc here, I picked this diagram specifically because it also shows, and a lot of them don't, the diagrams in this interneuron, that means between the sensory and the motor neurons, there's a little one, and there's a little arrow there which shows what we talked about, but there's another output here which goes to the brain. And long after you have moved your hand, your brain finds out that it's happened. And we're talking milliseconds here. Okay, that's a long time. So, it's all happening purely automatically. Here's a knee-jerk reflex. Now, you've got your femur here, and so on, tibia, fibula. Here's your patella. Now, the patella sits in this tendon, which is attached to your quadriceps, these four great big muscles here. Okay. Now, when the doctor or whoever, or you can do it yourself, takes something and taps under the patella, you stretch, because there's a little bit of a gap there. You can take this tendon can then be pushed in, so it stretches this. So when you get a sudden stretch of these muscles, they react by doing the opposite, by contracting. So they contract and the leg goes out. But the signal, the actual neural part, is that it's got the sensory nerves are within the muscle that go into the spinal cord, out again to the muscles here, that goes to two places. Because don't forget, all muscles have got pairs, the agonists and the antagonists. So when this contracts, this one has to relax. If it doesn't relax, you've got a problem. So to be able to raise your leg, this one contracts, the biceps relax, the quadriceps contract and the hammies relax. And then, of course, you've got the interneuron, which sends message up to the brain. So does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So I put this in because of this interneuron, it's just so important. So you've got the reflex of something happening here, it goes up there, around here, interneuron. So you've got the sensory neuron and the motor neuron coming, and the muscle does something. Remember, muscle is the effective organ, the one that does, the organ that does something. And then that goes up to the brain. Now, how does this message move? How does this electricity get generated? So we have this voltage difference, or what's called a potential difference, between the inside and the outside of the neuron. That's the nerve cell. And this membrane potential is created, it's produced. I should use the word produced rather than created. But by the uneven distribution of electrically charged particles. These are the ions. All right, so this is normal. That on top of, outside the membrane and under the membrane or inside the cell, they're different. And we have 4 of these ions. Now, an ion is a charged atom. Now, sodium, probably the easiest way to just to say it without going to the chemistry. Sodium and potassium can easily lose 1 electron. So they have 1 positive charge. Calcium can lose 2 electrons, so becomes has 2 charges. And chlorine can gain an electron. And if I had thought about it, I would have put up a periodic table just to show you how they fit in and what happens. But because of these charges, it's these guys that generate a voltage difference, because they have a different charge, different sizes, so they have a different charge, different level. So these ions, they move in and out, they enter and exit through specific protein channels. So they don't just slip in and slip out. There are channels right through the membrane, the nerve membrane, the neural membrane. And by doing that, the channels either open or close. So the neurotransmitters that come along and send a message, they either open or close. The signal tells them to do that. By opening or closing, you change the membrane potential. So that means say it's mainly potassium and sodium and chlorides there as well. And I'll leave calcium out of it, just talk too much that's there. But they generate the potential. Now, a decrease in the voltage, you'll see in the diagram in a second, is called, and this is what you want to happen, a decrease in the voltage difference is called depolarization. And that depolarization is the signal. So you need that to get to a certain level, what's called a threshold, and that generates an impulse. Now this impulse, the action potential, then moves along the neuron. So the action potential of this impulse, if you like, the signal, goes from the cell body to the synapse. Okay, this diagram try to explain what you're seeing here on the outside. You've got sodium, and on the inside, there's potassium. So when potassium moves out and sodium moves in, here I suppose, they generate a charge. There's sodium there, and it moves along, but they move in and out. This is how, when in the jumping across the nodes of Ronvier, by doing this, it moves along very, very quickly. That through these protein channels, you get movement of sodium and potassium all along the way, and that generates the action potential. Yeah, I suppose that's probably the easiest way to say it. It may not make sense, and I can't think of a simpler way of explaining it, but the movement of the potassium and the sodium across these channels changes the potential, which then automatically moves along. And then, of course, you've got, it moves very fast from there, from there to there, and then it just jumps, like a bit of lightning, if you like, that jumps across. And then it gets from there, moves to there, and then jumps to the next one, and so on. And it happens, as you know now, very quickly. So we have one neuron or cell body here. The signal comes down here very quickly, and these dendrites, these synapses attached to the dendrites of the next one, which moves on. But here, for the signal to get to this one, remember there's a gap here called the synapse, and then you've got the chemicals, the neurotransmitters moving through and sending it on, and then this happens once this signal comes down here and changes the potential of the membrane. I hope I'm not putting you to sleep. This is quite complicated and needs a little bit of brain power to put together, and that's why I have all these diagrams. I hope you're appreciating the complexity of it. Look, here's a lovely diagram which takes it a step further. So they're numbered. So you have your axon here, the action potential, that's the depolarization, comes along, and as you say here, it opens up the channels, and down here you've got calcium moving in and out. By having done that, it triggers the release of the neurotransmitters from the vesicle. So they move to the base of it, of the synapse. They are released. They go into this, they call it postsynaptic channel receptors. Now there's the synapse. So that's the pre-synaptic, and this is after. It's on the other side. So it's like a little gutter. You just move from one side to the other. And and then we go into the receptors, which then change the action or cause an action potential here. See the positives and negatives. There's a difference. And as you see the positives on the inside and negatives on the outside, when it moves, it changes and then they move across. So this action potential then moves through the membrane of whatever's coming up next. Now, within this system here, you've got the neurotransmitters have to be deactivated. They only have an action once, and that's it. And then they're taken up here, and then they go back up, back to the cell body to be reactivated. So this is something similar to what I put up earlier. So just to remind you the complexity of it, so that we have the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, we have the brain, of course, the spinal cord, and that's central. Somatic, that means the skeletal muscles, and the autonomic system. So these are the automatic, if you like. We have no control, and they are in two parts, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So the autonomic actually regulates virtually everything automatically. So let's have a look at this. The central nervous system is made up of, I'm just going to break this up into all the sections. The brain and spinal cord. And these all have 3 layers of membranes, and they're called the meninges. Now, I haven't mentioned it before, I don't think. The brain itself has no blood in it. There's a fluid called CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. And these 3 layers, the meninges, separate the blood from the CSF, and nutrients and wastes and gases just move backwards and forwards across these membranes. Right? So there's blood going to and from the brain, but not within the brain. So here's a diagram of, there's your brain. This is the back part of it here. That's a cerebrum, a cerebellum. That's for balance and movement. I'll go into detail in a minute. So, and here's your spinal cord. And just to show you the numbers, there, there are 7 cervicals here. There are 12 thoracics. So in the neck, there are 7 bones. There are 12 thoracics. There are 5 lumbars. The sacrum and the coccyx are the sitting bone, if you like. But in earlier animals, much further down the evolutionary scale, this is the tail. Now, this is where, to be able to stand up straight, to be bipedal, to walk on 2 feet, on 2 legs, we have this S-shaped, if you like, S-shaped backbone. Most animals on 4 feet, not more, all animals on 4 feet have sort of a slight curve like that. But for us to be walking upright, we have to have some mechanism to support everything. Now, chimpanzees, when they try and walk upright, it's more of a C shape, like that. And that's why they can't walk for long vertically. And here's some, between each of the vertebrae, there are nerves that come out, and they're all labeled. And this is just a few of the things that that relates to. Okay, now the brain, it really is the most complex organ that we have in our bodies. And the evolutionary the oldest structures, the oldest parts of the brain are essential for the automatic functioning. So we call that the reptilian brain, and that's the brainstem. That's at the back. And so even the reptiles, very early brains have these parts that control everything about them, and they don't think about it. Not much I can think of. They react to things like catching food. But a lot of it is purely reflex. So it's control from that, the back. So the three areas of the brain stem. So we have the medulla oblongata, and these are some of the things it controls. This is, for example, it's very, very important. So breathing, heart, blood movement, swallowing, vomiting, digestion. The second one is called the pons, and it actually helps with these. This is the main area, the medulla, and there's some reaction with that as well. And then you've got the third one, the midbrain, and receives and integrates information coming from the body, the sensory information coming in, and particularly sight and hearing. Again, if you think about animals that rely on their vision, rely on their capacity to hear, it's really has to be in the reptilian brain. It has to be in the old section. So here's the diagram. This bit here is the brainstem. Here's the medulla and the pons, and here is what's called the midbrain, and here is the cerebellum. Now, so the brainstem, this green bit, and this is a very, very, very old, because the cerebellum controls our balance, it controls our movements. If you've got problems there, you've got problems with movement. All right. Now, the rest of it I'll get to shortly. Now, I should also mention the hind brain, which is this bit here, which includes all these and the cerebellum. So it's all this area here. So, okay, it's called the midbrain, the section that's all part of what's called the hindbrain. And, and so the cerebellum, it's error checking and coordination. So if you want to go and pick up something off the table, how far do you have to extend your hand before you can close your fingers to pick up whatever you're doing? So the sight part is in there, the control of the muscles of the hand and the arm and the body to be able to reach. And that's such a complicated thing to do. So if you're developing a robot, you have to do little cameras for eyes, and the software that they have is so complicated to control, to coordinate what the camera sees and to be able to manipulate the robotic arm to pick up what it has to pick up or do whatever it has to do, and to be able to see it and to do it smoothly. And we do it without even thinking about it. And it's all done through this. And it's also, it coordinates our perceptions of things around us. And cognitive performances are learning performances. So animals have to learn where, which they get originally from their parents, or other animals around which they watch. They'll learn how to do things, what to do, where to go. And how to catch their food, what plants to eat, not to eat, and so on. So learning, remembering motor responses. Motor is movement. And so the cerebellum receives information about positions of the joints. Now, this is really important. So, so if you put your hand up, every joint that's involved has got a sensor which sends information to the cerebellum. And combined with that, every muscle in your arm, for example, your shoulder, your back, has got stretch receptors. How much are they stretched? So that tells the cerebellum where your hand is. So if you lift you close your eyes, you put your hand above your head or somewhere, you know exactly where it is, even with your eyes shut. It tells you. And then, of course, it also receives information through the ears and the eyes. It's a very complicated system, but imagine I don't know, a lion running after a kudu or something. It has to be able to work out when and how quickly it has to run to catch up, and the information it needs to be able to jump up on the kudu, the lion, that is, so that it can grab around the neck, or whatever animal it's running after. The coordination is incredible. Now, the hindbrain, it carries sensory information to and motor instructions from the higher brain regions. So all information going to the higher brain goes through this hindbrain, and information from the brain to the body goes through it. So everything is coordinated through the back of the brain. Excuse me. And so the pons and the medulla, if you remember, I mentioned earlier, they're very, very important for this purpose. Now, the brain also helps coordinate large-scale body movements, like walking, the balance, where you, how fast you're moving, where you're putting your foot, one at a time, of course, and so on. Everything is involved. And walking upright, we've only got 2 feet compared to a quadruped, 4 feet. It's much harder. And we do it faultlessly, generally. So, as the neuron, this is very interesting, the neurons that pass from the forebrain in the front and the midbrain, and when they get to the medulla, they cross over. So the information from the left side goes to the right side, and information from the right side goes to the left side. And so we are controlled, our right side of the body is controlled from the left side of the brain, and the left side of the body controlled from the right side of the brain. Now, the midbrain is also very important in all these vision, hearing, motor control, the sleep and wake cycles, very important, and how alert we are, and our temperature regulation, because our body temperature changes through the day and night. It varies. Now, remember the 12 cervical bones in the neck, and the 12 cranial nerves. And 2 of these actually come from the midbrain. So the oculomotor and the trochlear nerves they're involved in eye movement, eyelid and eye movement. And that's so important, what we were saying before, about vision control. This is just one example. Now, in the midbrain also, there's an area called the substantia nigra. It's the black substance. It's dark because it's got melanin. The melanin is the thing that gives us our skin color. There are two colors, the yellow and black, and the combination gives the colors. And what this layer of neurons does, the substantia nigra, is very important as a relay station. The signals from the brain going through to the hindbrain to the muscles, it controls everything to coordinate the movements. So the left brain and the right brain, which are separated, have to be able to be coordinated so that the left and the right do what they have to do in a particular order. You can't have the left and the right both taking a step forward at the same time. Think about it. However, if the substantia nigra is damaged, you get a problem with what's called Parkinson's. The lack of control of movement. Now, in the midbrain also there's a thing called the reticular formation. And this is part of it is called the reticular activating system. And this regulates sleep and arousal. So when you're feeling sleepy and drowsy, and when you're fully wide awake, it's all being controlled in the midbrain by this reticular formation. So the reticular activating system acts as a sensory filter. And before the sensors from the body go up, they all go through, remember they go through the medulla and the pons, but then they go to the reticular formation and the system here, and they act as another filter before they finally get to the top part of the brain, the cerebral cortex. And the more information that reaches the cortex, the more alert and aware we are. Okay, so this controls it. So if it reduces the amount of sensory information reaching the top, you become more and more drowsy. So if you're sitting there watching something on TV or reading a paper or a book, you start feeling drowsy at a particular time. It's this thing, the reticular activating system, which is doing it. It's reducing the amount of sensory material. If it lets the normal amount in, you will still be alert. And as we get older, I think we'll find that as we get through the day, we get more and more tired. And this tiredness would be through lack of sensory information. So the amount of sleep and the amount of wakefulness is controlled. And serotonin is a hormone. It's not a neurotransmitter, it's a hormone that stabilizes our mood, how well we feel, how happy we are, and impacts the whole body. And come from there. So the brain cells and the nervous system so this hormone links these systems together within the brain. You're getting the feeling there's a lot to it. It's just amazing. So serotonin helps with sleeping, okay, eating, digestion. There's an example, for example. If you drink milk before you go to sleep, especially warm milk, I think, it induces sleep because it contains this amino acid called tryptophan, and serotonin is synthesized, it's made from tryptophan, this amino acid. So I never liked drinking milk, but I know people who drink milk before bed, and they say it helps me sleep. Have you heard of that? Yeah. Oh, my throat. Anyway, so let's go to the thalamus. Remember, it's in the middle of the brain. It's not the big brain. It's sort of in that area, and it's it's the main input center for the sensory. So everything goes through these areas, and it goes to the cerebrum. So it also the main output. Okay, so senses go in, motor information leaves. So it goes through different stages to different parts of the brain for different purposes. And it's all sorted out in the thalamus. And it's sent, the sensory information is sent to different parts. If it's hearing, it goes to the part, the front here. I can't point to it. Where hearing is, vision is at the back. So the thalamus distributes the sensory information to wherever it has to go, where it's interpreted, it's integrated with the whole business. And the cerebrum, so the thalamus receives information from cerebrum and other parts that regulate emotion and arousal. So this thalamus is, again, a very important part. I mean, every part is important, but they each have their own little function and they develop in the evolutionary process to do it. The hypothalamus, I mentioned before. Now, the thalamus is a fairly largish thing in the middle. Underneath it, underneath the thalamus, it's tiny, it weighs a few grams. And it's one of the most important parts for homeostatic regulation because it produces a number of hormones. So this hypothalamus has the body's thermostat. So if your body is losing temperature, the thermostat will know that and sends signals down to start shivering, to close down blood vessels to the skin, for example. Centers for regulating hunger and thirst. If you're feeling thirsty, if you're feeling hungry, the feeling comes from the hypothalamus and then it does something about it. If you're an animal who, it doesn't think about, I haven't got time to eat, I have to go and find something to food. So we'll go and find some food, we'll find some water. It's also the pleasure center. And it's involved in sex mating behaviors, not so much in humans, but in animals. Because most animals, mammals especially, the female produces certain hormones which the male can smell, and that means she's in heat or she's ready to mate, and then that gets the male going, and so they know. While I was saying that, I remembered about moths and butterflies, for example. When the female moth, for example, is ready to mate, she will, when her eggs are ready to be fertilized, she will stick her little abdomen, her little bum up in the air and release a few drops a small number of drops of very, very potent um, chemical, which the male moth will pick up as it floats through the air, and he'll fly. He's got these antennae which look like feathers, and he picks up the scent through these antennae, and he follows the concentration gradient. She keeps flying sideways, up and down, whichever way, and eventually finds the female. But he'd not be the only one. So then there's a bit of a selection process by the female. So that's the hypothalamus. They don't have that, but sexual mating behaviors in animals, in mammals especially, is controlled by that. Fight or flight is certainly hypothalamus. It releases, it causes the adrenal glands to release adrenaline, which is the fight or flight hormone. Now, the hypothalamus also is involved in the circadian rhythms, the biological clock. We have it. So we have all sorts of repeated rhythmic behaviors. So sleep, wake cycles. And if you're traveling long distances from here to America, say, your sleep, wake cycles disrupted, and that could cause problems. Our body temperature cycle during the day, our blood pressure cycle during the day, menstrual cycles, sex drive cycles. I found this, your deepest sleep is around 2 o'clock. The lowest body temperature you have is around 4 o'clock. And then the blood pressure arises quickly in preparation for getting out of bed. Now, melatonin is used to help you sleep, so that stops, so you can wake up. And by 10 o'clock, that's your highest alertness. Right? And you keep on going like that. The highest blood pressure is there, the highest body temperature during the day. And then about 9 o'clock, melatonin starts to secrete, so you start to feel drowsy. Of course, individuals vary. This is just an example. And in animals, they have feeding rhythms, daily and seasonal rhythm, feeding and sleeping, but reproduction cycles, migration cycles, hibernation cycles, they're all controlled by the hypothalamus. I found this little cute thing. So you've got the nocturnal and diurnal animals. So they sleep in the opposite and feed in whatever they are. So they're all different and they all have their own systems. Now, the cerebrum. This is the most highly developed structure of our brain. This is where it all actually happens. Now, it's divided into left and right hemispheres. And each hemisphere has 3 layers. So there's an outer layer, the gray matter, and we call that cerebral cortex. The word cortex means an outside layer. Then there's an internal white matter, and then there's a cluster of what are called nuclei, little groups of neurons, and they call the basal nuclei, and it's really deep inside the white matter, so layer within layer. And these basal nuclei are very, very important for planning and learning movement sequences. So if you're a dancer, your basal nuclei are used to do the movements. If you're, well, I don't know, I suppose if you're learning to type, the movement of your fingers are all being controlled and help through that. If you're planning to do something, I said, I'm going to drive to Ballarat. How am I going to do it? So based on nuclei, work you through the process of planning your drive. So the problem with if this area is damaged, you get motor disorders. And Parkinson's and Huntington's are caused by problems in the basal nuclei. Now, damage also can make a person passive and immobile because the motor impulses no longer get to the muscles. So, importance. Now, the cortex. So, this is the largest and most complicated part of the brain, the cortex. And this has changed the most in all of vertebrate evolution. So we're at the peak, us humans, we're at the peak of vertebrate evolution, or evolution generally, of animals, and it has changed the most, with what we can do the most. Now, we have an addition, mammals have an additional layer of this cerebral cortex. It's called the neocortex, neo for new. And it allows for greater cognitive abilities and much more sophisticated behaviors. What other animal could learn the way we learn? Languages, poems, songs, and the numbers, the levels, it's just amazing. Now, the big changes are due to the relative size of the cortex. Now, we have a very large cerebral cortex. Other animals don't. They don't. What also happened, we got these convolutions. They go deep in. And what it does, it increases the surface area of the neocortex. So the neocortex does all this amazing stuff for us by, instead of being flat, it's got grooves, many, and so that increases the surface area. Now, this is amazing. So the human neocortex, it's less than 5 millimeters thick, but it has an area of about half square meter, and accounts for 80% of the total mass of the brain. So the cerebral cortex is divided to left and right, and they're responsible, like I said before, to the opposite sides of the body. And the communication, though, must be there. So there's this sort of thick band of white matter between the two in the middle. And that's called the corpus callosum. And this corpus callosum is in between them. Now, I've got diagrams in a sec, but we'll show you. So the left and the right are coordinated. Now, the cerebral cortex is divided into 4 areas. The frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, which is this one here on the side, temporal just inside, the occipital lobe at the back, and the parietal lobe at the top, back. There are also 2 other areas, the sensory cortex and the motor cortex. So the front is all about like thinking, planning, organizing, solving problems, emotions, behavioral control. Here we have perception, sense of the world, arithmetic and spelling. The occipital, that's where the visual cortex is. And temporal lobe, memory, understanding, language. Now, this is part of a group of drawings and things called a homunculus. Okay? So if you can imagine, if you see these things along here, that's part of the brain. So if you go that section there, from there to there, that'd be there. and going into the middle, what you have, all these things here are and they're controlled along there, that line there. Yeah, this motor cortex bit. There. These ones here are on the other side. All these movements here are controlled. So you've got genitals, your toes, your ankles, your knee, and so on. You've got your neck, your brow, your eyelids, your face, your jaws, your lips, your tongue, swallowing. So it's all been mapped. And this is really a sort of fairly small part of the brain. Now, this is a very interesting diagram. This white thing here is the corpus callosum. It's mapped quite big, and it actually supports the two sides, the left and the right. So here again, different, the frontal, the occipital, the temporal. So you've got all these from different angles of the body, looking at it. I'm sure I'll put this into the notes. I can do that with online because you can see it in color. If we had face-to-face teaching, I'd be doing this in black and white. It won't be the same, using up a lot of paper as well. So it works fine. I suggest you spend a bit of time looking at this. It's in the notes, and just amazing what it is. Let's have a look at neuroplasticity, something I mentioned much earlier. So neuroplasticity means that structural, functional changes in the brain that happen as a result of new experiences. Say you want to learn something new. I don't know. Say you want to learn knitting. You've never done knitting before. The mechanism that you need for the fingers and the eyes and all the controls that you have to be able to learn the mechanism and the sequencing is due to the ability of our brain to learn new experiences and how to do things. If you want to learn a piano, any musical instrument, where to put your fingers and the sound, the whole bit of being able to read music, all of it, to be able to learn something new. It's amazing. And the thing is, if the brain is damaged, other parts of the brain often pick up what the damaged part can't do anymore. So the brain can rewire and reorganize after brain death. That's what I was just saying. And so new connections to form, new neural pathways to the damaged brain are then terminated. Okay, you're still living, but information to and from are no longer useful. No, they're no longer there. And it occurs through sprouting and rerouting. Now, sprouting means new connections in between the neurons and the nerve cells. So, okay, not or neurons, and I just nurses, but rerouting, so changing the neural pathways by the deleting of the old ones and new ones to the active neurons. So you've got all this incredible stuff happening, and there's no reason why we can't learn at any age. I mean, the learning, a baby comes out, looks around the place, it learns very quickly who these smiling faces belong to. The kid starts to be able to learn to crawl, learn to walk, learn to eat with their own hands, all these things. Primary school kids learn so fast, and it's all due to this amazing neuroplasticity. And you know what? As we get older, we also can learn things, and just about anything. So here is.
That's why we're here, Ruben.
I know. I was going to say that, then it slipped my mind. So in rerouting here, if that's the normal one, the blue one is then damaged. The information goes through a different path. The blue one's here, that dies. So this one becomes the blue path. Here, that's the rerouting. The sprouting is where you get new dendrites sorry, not dendrites, new axons forming. So if the green one dies or gets cut or something happens to it, degenerates, then another one will start, will make a connection. So it's a living brain. It's changing all the time in small ways, but everything to help us. Now this one, again, it's the same sort of thing, but it's different. And have a look through it. I'm aware of the time, and we're just about done. Now, the peripheral autonomic nervous system, this is divided into two parts, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So this is generally a response to stress. This one is to maintain homeostatic mechanisms or homeostasis. So things that will happen in changes, like for example, if you're in a dark area and the light comes on, the pupils constrict. So you don't control that. That's all done. And this diagram shows you approximately where these controls come from. If you're thinking of eating or drinking something, saliva comes. You don't control that. If your heart slows down, there's no need to beat fast. You don't need that much blood floating around. And the rest of it. These ones here, if you're under stress, by relaxing bronchi, you get more oxygen. You inhibit salivation, the mouth dries. So if you feel stressed, you get a dry mouth. You dilate pupils so you see better. You increase your heart rate. You slow down digestion to stop the flow. The amount of blood going to the digestive system is reduced, and so on. And more glucose for the fight and flight, and so on. So I think this is the last slide. The autonomic peripheral nervous system, the two parts. So again, this is for preparation for sympathy, for stress, and all those things are done. Now, and this one is for controlling bodily functions, and all these are listed here. And hey guys, that's it.
Thanks, Robert.
It's good to see so many of you now have joined us, and I hope you managed to follow some of what I was saying. Hopefully, all of it. I have a request from you guys. This is this one I wrote.
Oh, no, Dick.
Sorry, Janelle.
Sorry.
Oh,
I've been thrown off so many times.
yeah. I need new ideas for new talks. Pat said to me, my wife said, go through your old biology textbooks, see if something comes up. But if any of you have any ideas, anything you'd like to suggest, I'm more than happy to run with it and see what I can make of it. And as we said, you're never too old to learn something new or learn something to remember from the old days.
So
And,
thank you, Ruben. That's a very, very good talk. At a complex subject, it's third year medical student standard. So if some of your listeners were having trouble, just I'm an 80-year-old doctor, and I tell you, I had to concentrate pretty hard. So it's, you did a wonderful job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be able to access the recording session, to record the recording.
I've recorded it, yes. I've recorded
Okay,
it.
so we'll be
And,
able, yeah,
so what happens is now
you'll
I,
send us a link.
I send Chris Pereira, who is a course coordinator for U3A, and so I finished my talk. Can you get me the link? I get the link from him. I download it, and then so I then have it on my computer,
Mhm.
and then I can put
Send
up
it.
to YouTube. Have any of you looked at the YouTube to see if it works all right?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, it was
Oh,
all right.
okay.
It was okay. Yeah.
All right. It's,
Ruben, how many more sessions have we got with you?
nothing new. I'm going to dig some of the old ones out and rework them. So I'm always looking for something new to do, but I also have to rework them. Altogether, I have about 24, 25 lessons. Some that I did early last year, with many of you weren't there then. I could pick some of those up. Why, Eugene?
No, just curious, just for my planning purposes, nothing.
Okay. Look, I'll just keep going. And if you've heard it before, I'm sure you want to remember it all anyway. But at least,
our plasticity is not up to scratch, is it?
oh, thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. It was really great. Yeah.
Okay, guys.
Fantastic.
All being well, I will see you in a fortnight.
Thank you.
Thank
Will
you.
do. Thank you.
Bye all.
Thanks,
Thank you.
thanks, Ruben.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful to see you.
Have a good fortnight, everyone.
Yes.
You too.
Ruben,
We'll try.
Peter.
yeah, could you send me the notes, please? Because I didn't get your email.
Oh, yes, thank you. I will do it immediately once I'm out of this.
Okay, thanks, Ruben.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Alan, everything all right?
Yep.
Yep.
Excellent.
But I don't know whether you can see this. Does that show?
First steps. How?
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got this from the States about a month ago, and I've just about finished it. It's very good.
Oh, wow. Okay. I've got other
If anybody wants to get it.
But is how upright walking made us human. Okay.
Jeremy.
I'll show you. Where is it?
Something.
It's back to front, isn't it?
Who's
Is that
that?
back to front for you?
Sapiens.
No. It's
A brief history of humankind.
mine is back to front when I look at it.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yours is okay.
It's by
Who's that?
Yuval Noah Harari. It's his first of 3 books. I've got all 3. It's fantastic.
Right.
Absolutely fantastic.
Okay.
Okay.
Sapiens.
So,
Okay, I'll look at
highly
one.
recommend it.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
Anyway, listen, you've all got my email address. If you can think of anything, I'm happy to play with it, lesson-wise. Otherwise, I will just
Okay.
dig out an old one.
Okay.
Well,
Okay. Wonderful.
Okay.
okay.
Basil, I hope you're feeling better soon. Yeah. Okay, guys, must
Okay.
go.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye.
Ruben. See you later.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.